It's time for another podcast by George. Straight talk, straight from the heartland, that'll have you saying, "By George, I think he's got it." Now, here's George.
Hello, hi, how are you? Welcome to another podcast by George. Big news. It isn't just COVID-19 any longer. It's these protests, these riots around the country, particularly in the major metropolitan areas, although it's revisited the heartland as well. Reminds me of, the 90s and certainly the 60s. And we've got our friend, Dr. Stephen W. Schmidt, the Lucan Endowed Professor of Politics at Iowa State University, coming back on the podcast. But before I get to it, I kind of wanted to give you my little brief thumbnail on this. And, the subtitle for the podcast is Straight Talk, Straight from the Heartland. I'm going to give you some straight talk here that's straight from me. You may not like it, but this is the way that I'm looking at it. Number one, the tragic, horrific death of George Floyd in Minneapolis. There's one angle of that doesn't get reported very often, and it's been reported ad nauseum. My God, I just can't stand to look at that video again. But there's one thing about this that goes all the way back to Rodney King, and that is these police officers that have these men on the ground. These are great big men on the ground. They are afraid they're going to get up and get away at best, or at worst, get up and kick their ass. I mean, that's what this has a lot to do with. People wonder, how it happened. Well, you can see it how it happened in the video. But I'm telling you, that's a part that plays into this. And it has to do with the culture of policing in America. I mean, those guys, those cops have those military backgrounds. A lot of them are combative. They're competitive. And they don't want to get their ass kicked. They don't want their man to get away. I understand that to a certain respect. But maybe when it comes to these minor things, and, George was accused of passing a $20 bill up there in Minneapolis. Or, if the dude gets up off the ground, you can't let him kick your ass, but you might, if he runs away, he runs away. And adding the insult to the injury is that the officer in question that was arrested knew the dude. They worked together at the same nightclub. Now, they didn't know each other well, but I mean, they know where the guy is. He's a local. He's in the community. I mean, go back and live to fight another day. Go back to get the guy if he gets up off the ground. My God, don't kill him with a move like that. And that's a lot of what they're doing. And I don't want to wax too much poetic here, because this is one of these areas, as a tired old white man living here in the Midwest, I don't want to try to tell these African Americans anything, because, man, I get it. And I've said on the podcast before, you don't know until you walk a mile in their shoes. You don't know if you grew up on a cul-de-sac instead of a shotgun shack what these folks are afflicted with their entire lives. You don't know what it's like to come of age and be 10 years old and realize that because of the darkness of your skin, you're never going to be like the people you see on TV, the people you see on the internet, the people that you read about. It ain't happening. It hasn't happened. It ain't gonna happen. And that plays a large role into why folks rise up and just say, enough is enough, and take matters into their own hands. And I get that. And Doc, that's kind of a long-winded intro. The other thing I want to say is, God, quit shooting these journalists. I mean, quit attacking journalists. I don't like to see these people gassed and handcuffed. Here's the deal. If you're a police officer, you see somebody commit a crime, yeah, you take them down, you do what you have to. They committed a crime. These journalists aren't committing crimes. I saw a guy on the web here recently that said, if you could do this kind of stuff and just yell, press, I'm press, I'm press, everybody would do it. Well, not if they're not committing a crime, it doesn't matter what they say. You don't do this to them. So, I always have journalists at heart, because I used to be one. I'd like to think that I still am in some ways, but we'll get to some of this stuff later. And Doc, it's been a long time since we've had you on the podcast. My God, nothing's happened since the last time you were on. You were on when I remember the COVID-19 breakout was just beginning. And think of what's happened to this country since you and I last spoke just a couple of months ago.
Depression-era unemployment, businesses failing permanently. A lot of those businesses are never going to come back because they were small, they were not capitalized, they didn't have a lot of inventory or money, they can't pay the rent in their structures, and their little stores and restaurants. And so those are going to go away, which means long-term unemployment that we face now. And the coronavirus is, a formidable enemy. It's out there. We've tried flattening it out in some places. It has flattened, in others it's flaring again. We're told this thing is going to be with us for at least a year, probably more. The coronavirus is not a bug. It is not an insect. It's not a mosquito that you can spray and kill the mosquitoes. It's RNA and DNA. I'm not going to try to explain what that is and how DNA and RNA can be such an incredible enemy, because I don't understand it well myself, but that's what it is. And places that were doing so well, like South Korea, have had to shut their schools again because one guy went to a nightclub and had coronavirus, and everybody got it, and it boomed and exploded, and so they just closed all their schools again. So it's an up and down, constant guerrilla warfare battle against that. And then we have what we just didn't need at all, which was the killing of this fellow up in Minneapolis. And it happens every day. Often it isn't videotaped or shot on a cell phone. More and more it is. And when that happens, people get outraged. And it's not just black people, it's everybody looking at that is, why are you kneeling on the guy's neck for 9 minutes and grinding your knee into it? And you can tell that cop he's got a purpose. He's enjoying it. The guy is down on the ground, handcuffed, and there are 4 cops on him. He's not going anywhere. He may be big, and he may have been drunk at the time or on drugs or whatever. But what I asked was, when I was young and foolish, the police had paddy wagons, and they would come up with a, well-designed, kind of a van. And if you arrested someone, you immediately put them in the paddy wagon and shut the doors on it. And then you didn't have to struggle with them and try to shove them into a little tiny, electric SUV or whatever the hell cops are driving these days, which is a disgrace. At least they used to drive great big American cars, but now they have these little tiny cars. And now we have a video of them apparently struggling with him in the back of their cop car. And so, of course, once the outrage is inflamed, you can't really control the peaceful protests from the provocateurs, from the right-wing nationalists to the left-wing Antifa or whoever it is. But clearly, many of the cities have lost control over law and order. And we saw that in the 60s. And we saw it with the Rodney King flare up in Los Angeles as well, some years later.
Well, and when I think about the 60s, and I saw this excellent column that you're about to blast out, I'm reminded of how I have extra sympathy or empathy again for African Americans that would actually want to take to the streets and do something more than sing Kumbaya. We're talking the 60s, Doc. 60 years later, the advances, if any, not a hell of a lot. What we're seeing on television doesn't look a lot different than we saw in 1968. And just for a flashback, people don't realize what was going on in this country. Kennedy was killed in 63, Malcolm X was killed in 65, and then in 68. And, I'm a teenager at home watching Walter Cronkite. It seems like the television was coming on with breaking news every night. Robert Kennedy was assassinated. Martin Luther King killed in Memphis. My God, the fabric of the country was coming apart. And it ain't far from that right now.
Well, that's right. I mean, I was just saying to someone yesterday, we haven't seen any political leaders assassinated yet. And President Trump dove into the bunker in the White House.
I saw that.
They looked out the window and they saw a formidable, giant, angry crowd, and the Secret Service and the Washington, D.C. police. And I didn't know that Washington, D.C. had a National Guard. I learn something new every day. But Washington, D.C. is not a state, but they have a National Guard. And the mayor finally called them out because they were not able to control some of what was going on. And I think it's frightening to think that the president was told, we'd better get you into that nuclear bombshell-proof bunker in the basement of the White House because we don't know how this is going to turn out. That's extraordinary. So, when we're looking at all the looting and stuff, what I keep saying, and I saw a comment this morning from a very prominent person, that really then, destroys all of the outrage and all of the concern that we have about police brutality. Because what it does is it reinforces a horrible stereotype about young black men, which is, if they have a chance, they'll rob you, they'll loot you, they'll attack you. And you watch any channel in any city in the United States, and what you're seeing is people smashing windows and going in and stealing liquor and drugs and clothing and stuff, and setting places on fire. And I think in the end it plays into the President Trump and conservative law enforcement oriented politicians. People say that, that this is going to be Joe Biden's time. But, when things start falling apart and people feel that law and order is collapsing, they go for the law and order politicians.
Well, maybe this will, even as narcissistic and ignorant as he is, Donald Trump will get a wake-up call on this by having to jump in that bunker like you talked about. It reminds me of Nixon at the height of the Vietnam War looking at the protesters right outside the White House over there in Lafayette Park. That had an effect on him. I mean, he didn't think they probably were going to breach the White House and come in there and get him, but he knew that public sentiment was certainly turning against him and that those people were a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah, but he could have gotten reelected and been in their suite and gone out as a two-term president if he hadn't been so paranoid. I mean, he was way ahead in the polls. George McGovern, the Democratic candidate, was nowhere. And Nixon was so paranoid that he set up that, Watergate group of morons, frankly. I remember it clear as a bell when they went in and broke into the Democratic headquarters at the Watergate complex because they thought that McGovern had some secret campaign plan that would defeat Nixon, which there wasn't one. And all the protests and all that, and Nixon being sobered by it, that was not enough probably to change American public opinion. I mean, Americans were angry at the protests as well. And it's just a sociological phenomenon when law and order collapse. I lived through it in Latin America many years, as well as New York, Columbia University, 1968, which is what my article is going to be about. As soon as law and order crumbles, even the nicest people will go into an Apple store and snag a couple of laptops.
Well, here's what I'll say. Now, this is my own leftist perspective, but, if you look at these videos, now, there's one I saw in particular. I don't know if you saw that, but there's a guy dressed in black with a gas mask with an umbrella, oddly enough, a black umbrella, and he's walking along knocking windows out. Now, he's one. Now, I've heard some real lefties, progressives out there say that guy's undercover cop. He's somebody. Here's what he is to me. There is a group of people out here. I'll call them Turner Diary nuts. I mean, they're in every major metropolitan area of this country. They're looking to start or ignite a civil war. They want to turn the whole thing upside down. This goes back to Charlie Manson was of the same mind. Timothy McVeigh. Lee Harvey Oswald was that. John Wilkes Booth. I mean, they just want to get it started. They want to get it rolling. Right. They'll break those windows in those stores, and then, like you say, once it's been breached, other people on the street will say, well, what the hell? There's laptops and TVs in there. They already broke down the windows and doors. I'll go in there and get it. And, of course, they get the blame. And at one point, they might even have been peaceful protesters. Yeah. But that guy with the umbrella, he never was. I mean, that guy...
Actually, that's interesting that you mentioned that, because I just saw again this morning, they're investigating who he really was. Yeah. Some are saying he might have been an undercover cop who wanted to get this going. Yeah. Some are saying that he was a right-wing, conservative boogaloo guy that wanted to get a race war going. The others are saying, no, it was Antifa, which is the anarchist group that is anti-capitalist, anti-Wall Street, and that has shown up at almost every major event where law enforcement and law and order collapses.
Could have been.
Including the huge World Trade Conference in Seattle some years ago, where they went absolutely wild and smashed all the Starbucks, smashed all the McDonald's, banks, looted downtown, and created, a hugely embarrassing situation for the U.S., which this one, again, has become an embarrassing situation. The Chinese are saying, well, you don't sympathize with what we're trying to do in Hong Kong, which is to control a bunch of looters and terrorists. How about, Minneapolis and let me breathe, I can't breathe. And so our world prestige and leverage has collapsed in the last couple of weeks for many reasons before that. But for this, the fact that we are a country of great inequality, great racial tension, and, the adversaries of the U.S. are laughing and saying, see, these guys, they're very vulnerable. Marco Rubio, actually, the Republican senator from Florida, said recently the Republican Party has to side with much greater support for social change and for income equality and job equality, because otherwise we're going to have a huge problem in this country. And he said that before this all broke out.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, the handwriting was on the wall. I just saw an article where the nut Susan Rice tried to blame this on the Russians. My God, this isn't the fault of the Russians. The Russians didn't do this. This is the fault of an American society that has been telling the oppressed in this country to wait. 60 years or longer in the instances of the African Americans, and my God, the Native Americans have been told that since, 1492, maybe when Columbus came ashore and saw what he thought were a bunch of potential slaves. I mean, it's nothing but an ingrain in American society. I wanted to get your take on this because you mentioned those small businesses. Now, I was mortified and said so on this podcast when that first CARES package came down, and those trillions of dollars were earmarked for those major multinational corporations, many of which have headquarters around the world, many of which don't pay taxes in this country, and the Cantillon effect, they call that. That money comes down the pipeline. It goes to those companies through the Fed immediately. They benefit from it. The stock market soars. Everybody's happy. All the investment bankers are going along fine, but these small businesses that you're talking about that are gone now, and they ain't never coming back. They've got to go through the SBA. It's convoluted. They don't get their money. The people that needed the money the worst, and I called for it in the form of a UBI for folks and Medicare for people that are sick and have the COVID-19, and they didn't get that. I'm looking at this now on national television, and I'm thinking, well, maybe Congress, and I'm not talking just Republicans here, Democrats as well, maybe they wish they had given these folks $2,000 a month to get them through this, because they've got no income. They're looking at no food here very shortly, and maybe short term we wouldn't have quite the problem that we have. Now, that might be a pipe dream, but what do you think?
Absolutely, you're right. And the welfare system, the welfare state, and we do have massive amounts of money. If you look at the federal budget, there's the pie chart in that textbook behind you. Schmidt, Shelley, Barty's American Government and Politics Today. available from Amazon and other excellent bookstores. That pie chart in the chapter on government is mostly Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, housing assistance, and other programs. We spend a lot of money to buy some equality, but also to quell social unrest. I mean, you put a lot of people on a minimum income and help them out with their food and public schools and some other things, they're less likely to rise up and overthrow the government. That's my own frank, cynical view. Well, it isn't just that we feel sorry for them and want their lives to be better. It's that we're buying them off so they don't do what they're doing now. And we have failed in that regard because income inequality in the United States has just escalated. You look at the other chart in that book on income inequality, and the people with middle class and lower income is shrinking, and the number of billionaires and people in the 1% has grown and is steady. I mean, so you can't run a tranquil country with that kind of social disorder.
And I love that mention in your book, and it'd be great for people to look that up and see that pie chart. And the other book I would recommend is this one off my left side here. This is Lee Camp, and what he talks about in there, and they're still looking into that, and I'm sure that you've heard this, the Pentagon, the Defense Department gets billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars every year. They've never been subjected to an audit. They just did one a couple of years ago, the first audit ever of the Defense Department, and there was $21 trillion the Defense Department could not account for in this audit. So then you got to step back and think, my God, how accurate is the amount of money that we are spewing out? And particularly I think it's probably much greater than we ever envisioned that are going to bombing people and blowing the shit out of them around the world. Well, anyway, I don't want to get off the tangent here. One thing I did want to talk to you about, because again, we've kind of I was waiting until Joe Biden was going to announce a vice presidential candidate, and ironically, oddly enough, a lot of people were talking up Amy Klobuchar from Minnesota.
Yeah, she's finished.
Yeah, right before this broke out. But I didn't want to talk about politics a lot because of what else was going on with COVID and now with this. But Doc, with your esteemed career now coming to into its twilight, just like with me and everybody else, you must really be struck by the fact some people think, well, I don't want to talk politics right now because of what's going on with the George Floyd situation. Man, you cannot separate politics from the news of the day. It is politics in one way or another.
Well, it is politics, and more than ever, when you have crises, you need leadership. You need to talk about who is going to offer the lead out of this. Where is the path that takes us away from this to something better? So this is the perfect time for us to be thinking about politics. And the question of whether Donald Trump, who is very divisive, who manages to push a whole lot of really sensitive buttons that set off all kinds of things, whether he is the ideal person to help us through all of these things, the COVID crisis, which he has not done a good job with, the economic crisis which resulted from the COVID crisis, which, again, the federal government and the president says, well, it's up to the states, the governors need to take care of this. The trade crisis. Right now, I just saw just a minute ago, I watch news all day when I'm not out mowing my pasture and painting my house and hunkered down in Nevada, to protect myself against I don't know what. But they said that China is not going to buy American soybeans. China has decided the Americans are my enemy. We don't need to buy their soybeans. We can get them from Brazil. We can get them from Argentina. We can get them from South Africa. We can get them from other places. You know what that's going to do to Iowa if that trade dispute with China continues? are hogs, that we're euthanizing, killing all these hogs because we can't get them to market because of the COVID virus, because restaurants are closed, cruise ships are no longer floating and buying millions of pounds of ribs and pork chops. Those should have been shipped to China. China has a huge deficit in pork because they have basically a virus that has infected their hog community and has killed millions of hogs. But because we have a trade war going and tension with China, American and Iowa farmers can't really sell their products in the international market where a lot of these things went in the past. And so the budget deficit in the state of Iowa, $500 million right now. We're living in a really disrupted moment at every level. Towns, communities, cities don't have the tax revenue that should be coming in because their restaurants and businesses are shut down. This is a time for leadership. And so Biden is supposedly the Democratic Party candidate. He still isn't, which is an unbelievable critical situation. I mean, Biden is still not officially the candidate of the Democrats to run in November. They need to get their act together. Instead of pushing the convention back, they should have had a virtual convention several months ago and gotten their delegates on Zoom and on other social communications media and held a convention like that and nominated him if he's the guy. I don't think he's the best guy anyway for the Democrats. They kind of ended up, with what was left at the bottom of the barrel. And is he really going to be able to lead? And he has to pick a vice president, as someone said this morning, who is young and healthy. Young and healthy. Because he is old and he may be healthy, but we don't know. But he may very well, if he gets elected, die in his first term. And so it's really important for the Democrats to pick a vice president who is convincing, who is not chosen just to balance out some racial quota, which is what they're talking about, that he needs to pick A, a woman, and B, an African-American woman. But he needs to pick an African-American woman who is terrific, who is really charismatic, has a lot of leadership experience, can excite people across the spectrum. And that would help a lot to have some, some life in the Democratic Party.
Well, and get those people to vote, because the largest block of voters in America is non-voter. Right. I like Nina Turner for that purpose. She might be able to help him with that. And of course, Doc, I created a meme just this past week, which I don't do very often, but it was my preferred candidate, Tulsi Gabbard. I said we could have had a silver chalice, and instead we got a cracked sippy cup, which is kind of the way I look at it. But here's my idea for Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard, she's going out of politics. She apparently is not going to run for her seat again. I would love to see somebody put her in charge of the National Guard's role in the COVID-19 response that is going to be huge, I think, this fall. She's a major in the Army National Guard. That's right. She's a medic. She knows, she's very knowledgeable about Congress and the way things work. That would be an excellent role for her. Make her a coronavirus czar, basically.
I agree.
That would be a great role.
No, that's true. And she is, she has a diverse ethnic, cultural background. And so she adds to that, what is the American dream and reality, which is that we're a country made up of all kinds of people from all kinds of places with all kinds of religions. And since she did not make it to the presidential level, I don't think Biden will pick her as vice president, but I think that's a great suggestion. I hope you send Biden a text message or an email.
Well, no way he'll pick her.
He knows how to use that, but
yeah, you're right. He may not from his meetings that he has in his basement or whatever. Right. He may not be able to use it. Well, right. The other thing I'll say in closing, and I want to give you the last word here, but my last word basically is I want to tell all my Democratic friends off there, and it really ticks them off, but I'm telling them, knock off this, blue no matter who stuff. This is not the time for that. Like you said, Biden is not the nominee yet. This is the time for voters to demand that the eventual nominee, Biden, if that's who it is, deliver the things that they want. Poll after poll indicates that people want a better health care system, Medicare for all, for lack of a better name. They want a UBI during this pandemic. Hold their feet to the fire on those things. Don't let them know that you're already on board the bandwagon, because here's what'll happen. And Doc, I know you have seen this for 50 years probably.
That's right. Since I was a young child.
Yeah, if you commit to those candidates now, because they need that money desperately to compete against pull my finger Donald Trump between now and November, they're going to have to cater to the whims of the donors of those big companies. They're going to have to deliver the goods for them to get that money. And if they've got you on the bandwagon already, everything moves further to the right. That's what happens. That's how we got the Overton window to where it is. That's why Democrats today are moderate Republicans of the Doc's era, of my era. That's how the whole thing changed. It was that money in politics that did that. So just kind of, when a pollster calls you, tell them, no, I haven't decided yet. When the candidates get a hold of you, say, here's what I want from you before you get my vote. And then in the end analysis, as we all know, it won't matter, because the Electoral College will take over and your vote probably.
It's true. And the reality is, I've heard too many Democrats say, gee, I wish Governor Cuomo of New York were the candidate of the Democratic Party. He's younger, he's dynamic, he's organized, he's doing a great job in New York, and so as I told you in one of our other podcasts, unfortunately, every 4 years, Americans say, "Is that the best we could do?" And it's both the Republicans saying it about Trump, the Democrats saying it about whoever they pick. We always say there is somebody better, and this year more than ever. More than ever.
All right, that's a great close. I want to get back here with you again. I want to do another podcast. This is, I hate to even have a giggle during these very serious times. This is horrible, the news of the day. I want to talk to you in an upcoming podcast about ranked choice voting. I get asked about that a lot, just so you can kind of explain what that is, how that might have a role in maybe breaking the duopoly that we suffer from of just Republicans and Democrats, how realistic a third party is or not. Those types of things.
I think that's a great topic. Some states have it. Maine has it. A couple of states have that. And frankly, the other thing is, of course, that Iowa has a primary that is going to be very interesting. I'm just responding to a Washington correspondent's question. What's going to happen in Iowa in the primary? Who's going to be is Steve King going to get renominated, or is he going to lose out? And if so, to whom? What is going to happen in the 2nd district, where my former student, Mr. Loebsack, is no longer running, and the Republicans have to decide between two not very great candidates who they might pick. And Joni Ernst, the senator, is frankly under attack and could be vulnerable. So it's going to be an interesting primary.
Yeah, that Joni Ernst situation is huge. Stephen King, what do you think? I've got kind of an off-the-wall analysis of that. God, this is going to go on forever, but I say be careful what you wish for. Stephen King is an idiot. He embarrasses us all. Nobody likes him. That's true, but he's not effective. He's not on committees. He doesn't wield much authority in Congress. Nobody listens to him. If you're a Democrat out there hoping that the Republicans get rid of him, pay attention to who they replace him with.
Yeah, because it might be somebody really active and aggressive and who is a real player. So, the other thing is that I've said this, the Democrats are praying that Steve King gets the nomination because they think that he would be easier to defeat because people kind of know him. And the last time around, J.D. Scholten, who is the Democratic uncontested primary candidate, came very close to defeating Steve King in the election. So it's going to be a kind of Machiavellian situation there.
All right, Doc, we're way over time. It's not hard to do whenever
Thank
you
you.
and I get rolling on this. This is great. I wish you all the best. You shelter safe and well. We'll get back with him soon. Folks, that's Dr. Stephen W. Schmidt. He's the Lucan Endowed Professor, Iowa State University. He's got a 50-plus year career in politics. He's the world authority, particularly here in the state of Iowa, and we're just delighted to have him. And if you like these podcasts, if you enjoy this, please follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook. Subscribe to us on YouTube, ring the notification bell so that you find out about each and every one of the shows as they come along. But for right now, that's going to do it. That's going to wrap it up. That's another podcast by George.